Hello and welcome to today's presentation brought to you and co-presented by ReadTech and One World Sync. This is a live presentation that will be recorded and registrants will receive by email links to the on-demand recording in the slides, which have a wealth of reference information. Today's topic is focused on UDI data management, understanding EU UDAMED, global requirements, and GDSN. Today's presenters are Gary Sainer, who is a Senior Manager of Information Solutions at ReadTech. Gary is a subject matter expert on UDI and other structured content reporting that is submitted to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. He serves as co-chair of the industry structured product labeling technical team and represents ReadTech on the advisory board of the Medical Devices Group. From One World Sync, who is a leading provider of product content solutions, we have Tim Marshall, who is a strategic account executive, and he's been working for a number of years with medical device and pharmaceutical manufacturers. Also, Randy Mercer, Vice President of Global Product Management, and also a long tenure in the continuing development of enterprise software solutions for healthcare master data management. Throughout the presentation, if you have questions, please submit them in the questions panel, and we'll address as many as possible at the end of today's session. If we don't address your question in the recording, we will get back to you individually in the next couple of days. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Gary to give us a quick overview of the agenda. Take it away, Gary.
Thank you, Angela, and welcome everyone to this particular webinar, and a special welcome to Tim and Randy to join us today. We have a pretty full agenda, walking through some of the high-level review of UDI requirements, various regulatory bodies around the world. We'll focus in on the European Union UDAMED UDI activity, and with a special focus today on GS1 standards, specifically the Global Data Synchronization Network. We have a section dedicated to that, and we'll be asking Tim to give us a good review of those particular standards. And then we'll touch base on various data management communication options that you have in submitting data to regulators and also trading partners. And so we'll recap some of that information. Randy will present some options and capabilities that One World Sync has to offer surrounding GDSN. And I'll present a couple options that you have with ReadTech. So we'll see how we work together in those particular solutions. And then we'll reserve some time for Q&A at the end. With that, let's get started. This is a real high-level overview. I know that some of you may have been aware of some of the activities around the world. Just recap here, and some of these slides I'll kind of skim over and let you have a little bit of homework to do if you want to dive deeper, but that allows us to keep moving and cover a lot of material. So back in 2014, compliance dates for Class 3 were initiated with the United States FDA. We're now just roughly 6 months away from the date of application for the EU regulation for medical devices in 2020. There's activity in Netherlands with the National Implant Registry. And then there's a second wave of regulators. These regulators have various documents and are making very significant progress moving forward with UDI adoption. China and South Korea, noteworthy, are involved in various pilot activities even as we speak. I then have a third group, and includes a number of different regulatory bodies around the world that are having various discussions and making initial plans for UDI, not quite as far along as perhaps the second wave there, but they're definitely in the mix. And as you look at your market regions that you distribute products into, you will see that most, if not all, some of these regulators have or in the near future will adopt UDI. So there are two major trends surrounding UDI. Obviously, the first one being the regulators are implementing UDI. There was hope that there would be a very strong coordination and high harmonization. Actually, there's a group, International Medical Device Regulators Forum, IMDRF, that even back in 2013 put out some guidances We don't have any jurisdiction for enforcement, but it is a good platform for UDI information. US definitely used that information. EU used that. More recently, this group, IMDR, put out some application guides and a data elements map this year. But what we're seeing is that as individual regions bring on UDI requirements, that at best there's some convergence of the policies, but there's not full harmonization. And it looks like there won't be one uniform approach to UDI. There's a lot of very detailed differences as UDI is implemented. The second major trend as we look around the world is that a number of customers that are buying product are starting to require the information be in a structured fashion. And they're pointing to GDSN standard, the Global Data Synchronization Network, to receive that. So there's a number of group purchasing organizations, some of the supply chain distributors and retailers that you might be selling to, healthcare prescribers and providers. Noteworthy here is the National Health Service of England. We'll actually touch on that a little bit more in detail later. They're a very strong early adopter of GDSN standards. And noteworthy is that this is not a U.S. type of activity. We see it in an international scale, and turns out to be a global trend. So those two major trends, regulators are adopting UDI and customers are adopting UDI. I have the next few slides in a chart, tabular type of format, showing the region, some of the UDI dates, and a couple comments about that approach that each of the regulators adopt. I'll skim through this rather quickly, and again, this will be a number of slides for homework. Noteworthy on the FDA front is next September 2020, Class 1 devices have their compliance date. Obviously, if you have not submitted any previous classes, there's a lot of infrastructure to set up, but those devices have that September 24th timeline. EU, we'll kind of skip over that because we're going to dive into that much deeper a little bit later. Noteworthy is this announcement that the UDAMED launch date was delayed for 2 years. We'll take a look at the impact of that. Touch on Brazil in this slide. If you are marketing coronary artery stents and hip and knee implants, you should be aware that they're on a first wave that does require UDI identification on product labels in June of next year. Quick comment about China. It looks like August of next year, UDI would be required to be reported and on a label for Group 1. Now, Group 1 products include 64 high-risk implantables. So that's like their first wave of implementation. Further groups are expanded or expected to come out later on. And there's some initial data reporting that most likely would be able to be done through spreadsheets initially, and then automated means thereafter. Netherlands, if you have a product that's on the inclusion list, and you can look that up on the Dutch website surrounding the Dutch National Implant Registry, LRR, and that particular registry, LRR, has some requirements to report information and have that in place by January of 2020. So I think there's roughly about 60 or so items on that list. So be aware of that Dutch implant list. Quick comment on the National Health Service of England. Now, this is not a regulatory body. This is not the MHRH. They are a customer that are buying product from you folks and manufacturers, and using that, they provide well over 90% of all the healthcare in England. They have been an early adopter of GDSN. Class 3, 2s, and 1s are now past due. Next event is September 21 for product information to be reported. And noteworthy on the right here is some requirements that the product be identified with the GS1 G10 and also be transmitted to the National Health Service through the GS1 GDSN network. So that particular requirement is focused and only allows GS1 standards. So that is different to some of the other accommodations that we saw for various standards in other downstream users. Quick comment about Saudi Arabia. Looks like hopefully there would be this database launch at the end of the year. They have made timing statements saying that 6 months after that launch, the Class D devices would be implemented. So as early as June of next year, UDI would be implemented. Again, UDI on products and also reported to a database. I should also mention that for Saudi Arabia, they have implemented another module over and above the UDI module. It's an import and track and trace capability. So actual values of lots and serial numbers are to be reported. So that's over and above what has been implemented by other regulators, and we'll see how that fleshes out. And then South Korea, 2019, just this past month, some of the Class 4 devices, there's pilot underway to have UDI included on labeling, and data is now able to be reported. Initially, again, spreadsheet data reporting is able to be done. That's a quick high-level summary, and we'll take the next wave, this next section, and dive into the European Union UDAMED. And this was a major reform. Unlike the FDA, which added UDI as a layered-on requirement for all the other medical device regulations, the European Union rewrote the book, basically. All the current 3 directives are being replaced by 2 regulations, medical device regulation and in vitro diagnostic regulation. The good news is that all the variances that you saw by the directives, which do allow each member state to kind of implement the intent a little bit differently, the regulations are binding. So each of the member states will have a uniform type of implementation of the regulation. But the bad news here is this is sweeping across many different regulations and how the products are brought to market and how they are approved. A lot of activity here. We don't have time to dive into all these, and this is only a partial list. Noteworthy for this audience is about halfway down, all products would need UDI identification and registration. So that would be a new requirement for an MDR, IVDR compliant device. With the sweeping changes, each manufacturer needs to look at timelines, their product information, what resources, what systems need to be updated, and so on. This is a very significant, huge task. As to the timing, again, we're only about 6 months away here from the date of application for the MDR in May 2020. Very short stretch of time here. For in vitro diagnostics, their date of application is 2 years later in May 2022. And in the news, if you've been watching this European Union activity with MDR and so on, you have seen that the European Commission announced a delay of the UNAMID. So the database that records this information is now delayed out to May of 2022. And we'll take a detailed look as to the effects of that. But in that same statement, they said that the date of application for the MDR had not moved. So that does present a number of questions. We'll take a look at those. As you try to figure out your requirements, you'll need to take a look at your product inventory and divide it into 3 different categories. Those devices that will be discontinued, so I refer to those as the MDD, the AIMDD, and the IVDD, all those directive devices. For whatever reason, economic reasons, the evaluation might be too expensive, it's low return, whatever. They're not continued after the date of application. The second group are those directive devices that do have a certificate it's valid, and it can be continued after the date of application, and it continue to be placed on the market. So that has some effects and some characteristics we'll dive into. Your third category are include any of those new devices that come to market, any of those previous legacy devices that have an expired certificate. They would then need to be made MDR compliant, and also the class 1 directives that are self-certified. They don't have a certificate. They would need to fall into this MDR category. So let's get the timeline set down here at the bottom. The DOA for MDR in May 2020, and the DOA of the IVDR in May 22. And remember, this launch has now been shifted 2 years later to coincide with the IVDR DOA. So the first category of your devices, those legacy medical devices, they're able to still be placed on the market after the DOA for 4 additional years, as long as the certificate is still valid and has not expired, or there's no significant change. And then that is followed by a 1-year sell-off, meaning if that particular product is in your logistics chain, not yet to the end user, there's additional year where it can be continually distributed, but you're only able to place it on the market during that year or thereafter. The registration was originally at the DOA of the MDR, but now it's 2 years later, DOA of the IVDR. So these products need to be registered in UDAMED between May 2022 and November 2023, that 18-month window. The second category would be those MDR compliant medical devices. Again, if they meet all the documentation and approval process and so on, they can be placed on the market, it's our understanding, after the date of application. 1, 3, and 5 years after the date of application, those products need to have UDI on the label and on the product label itself. And some of those products, again, have a phased by class requirement to have UDI actually placed directly on the product themselves. Now, the registration of this group was, again, back in 2020, but now 2 years later, 2022, that 2-year delay, 18-month window now coincides with the IV or the legacy medical device time period. And just to be comprehensive in this discussion, the legacy IVD directive devices have a 2-year window where they can continue to be placed on the market, the 1-year sell-off, and an 18-month window, very similar to what we saw below. And those IVDR devices, again, if they meet all the criteria of the regulation, go through the documentation approval process, they can be placed on the market on May 2022. They have that 18-month window to register. They have, again, a 1, 3, and 5-year timeline for UDI being placed on the labels. So I know this is very crowded screen here, a lot of information. Tried to put it all in one so you can see, in this particular case, all the registrations for these 4 different categories of products are now in sync, 18 months long, starting on May 22, and then lasting to November 2023. So let's move over to some of the requirements. If you had been familiar with the FDA requirements for UDI, you'll see that very similar type of set of requirements, UDI placed on the product label. Some products need direct marking. There's a database to receive this information, UDAMED, that we talked about. A lot more attributes, by the way, than the FDA. And reporting requirements, noteworthy is that the UU does require the UDI to be placed on the patient implant card. There's a number of slides here that follow, and again, I'm just going to touch base on the first one. I think there's about 7 or so of these down in the appendix. Again, we'll leave that for homework. They do a comparison between the FDA and the European Union. What are the policies? How do you apply UDI and so on? And as an example here, the 3 issuing agencies that the FDA have approved are also approved by the European Union, but they include a 4th one, IFA, which is a German pharmacy type of nomenclature, but it's now added as a 4th one. A lot of good detail down in the appendix. We'll leave that for some homework. When the data is reported for a particular device, it's divided into 2 different categories into UDAMED. First is a family group level. So this is like a model group set of characteristics referred to as the basic UDI DI. And this particular record has a key field, the basic UDI DI value, a number of attributes, 36, that are common for all the members in the group. Down at the individual member level, each device has a host of attributes, again, much more so than the FDA, a lot more granular. The key field here is over in the left, the UDI DI, and there's a linking value for this particular member that shows what particular family it is in. So the basic UDI is that identifier at the family level. A couple quick takeaways, and then we'll move on. The EUDAMED delay announcement include the fact that the MDR DOA does not change. So all those regulations, the documentation, the conformity assessment, notified body activity, and so on, that timeline has not changed. EUDAMED launch has been delayed, but those reporting activities are not canceled. So there's phrase in this particular legislation that indicates the reporting still must be conducted under the corresponding directive procedures. We'll see how that fleshes out, but be aware that this is not just an omission. The reporting still needs to continue. Noteworthy is we're connected with the EUDAMED testing and performing some of the activity there with testing values, sending submission records and so on to the EUDAMED in a test environment. And we have learned that the European Commission is continuing that testing, so they haven't slowed down that particular activity. We continue to test data and new features and capability into EUDAMED. Takeaway here is that recommendation to continue preparing for the regulation. This is a huge transition task. We recently did a study survey of about 160 participants. 60 are continuing preparation, 27% are still evaluating what the effect would be, and only 2% indicated that they would actually postpone. So this is interesting to see that the big task of implementing MDR is still ahead of us, has some tight timelines, a little bit of a delay. Great to receive that as far as your preparation goes, but it's not something that you just simply walk away for 2 years. With that, I'm going to ask Tim to come on board and maybe discuss some of the standards, if you would, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Gary, and good morning and good afternoon to those on the call. So as everyone on the call probably has varying levels of knowledge with respect to the GS1 and GDSN standards, I'm going to run through a quick overview. And if there's questions, I'm happy to answer those at the end. So you can go to the next slide. So GS1 is a nonprofit international standards organization that develops and maintains global standards for business communication. GS1 serves many industries, including healthcare, retail, food service, and others that you see there on the slide. And some of the examples of the companies that are utilizing the standards, as you see, are Amazon, Johnson & Johnson, Walgreens, Abbott, etc. Next slide. So when we're talking about the GS1 product and logistics standards, there are really 3 themes that we're going to talk about. So identify, capture, and share. So a global trade identification number, or the GTAN for short, is the number that uniquely identifies a product worldwide. The global location number, or GLN, is the number that identifies an organization. Probably the best known of the GS1 standards is the barcode, which GS1 developed, I don't know, maybe 50 years ago. And that barcode has evolved from the standard 12-digit code to more complex iterations, and you can kind of see the 2D data matrix there on the right. But I think one of the most important standards, and where we're going to spend most of the time talking today, is the Global Data Synchronization Network, or GDSN, which GS1 developed to enable the exchange of product data between the source, such as a product manufacturer, and the recipient, or the end user, such as a hospital or retailer or regulatory agency that we're talking about here today. So the GDSN is an internet-based network of data pools who communicate with one another through the GS1 Global Registry. And the GDSN ensures that data exchanged is compliant with the GS1 standards. Next slide. So I mentioned interconnected data pools. There are 42 active data pools around the world today. A data pool is really just an organization such as One World Sync that contracts with manufacturers who supply the product data, or we contract with a data recipient such as a hospital, or in many cases we contract with both the supplier and the recipient of data. The data pool enables the electronic flow of data to the global registry, as you can see kind of depicted in our graph here, and eventually onto the data recipient. So this graph specifically shows a data flow process where the manufacturer's data pool and the recipient's data pool are actually different. But it brings up a good point. The beauty of the GS1 standards and GDSN is that a product manufacturer, for example, in, say, France, can contract with a data pool like One World Sync. So you say the data source there and the seller data pool, and they can send their data through the GDSN to a recipient, say in, I don't know, Australia, and that recipient's data pool may be based in Germany. So I know that sounds a little bit complicated and confusing, but the standards enable that data exchange seamlessly on a worldwide basis. Next slide. So in the early days of GDSN, those who first saw the benefits and jumped on the board quickly to adopt and drive usage were retailers such as Walmart and grocers like Kroger. And as the network grew and expanded, other industries such as food service and e-commerce began to take notice and join and rapidly expanded those industries as well. Healthcare, which is what I think most of us here are interested in, is one such industry whose GDSN usage and adoption has grown just dramatically over the past few years. With regulatory agencies and healthcare providers looking for better quality and more data, more and more healthcare organizations are adopting the GS1 standards and communicating through the GDSN. And one of the areas where One World Sync is currently seeing a great deal of interest is with hospital networks. Hospital networks are just desperately searching for better product data to use in their systems for everything from inventory control to bedside scanning and patient care. And they're always looking for an easier and better way to ingest the data and for higher quality data. So they're quickly adopting GDSN. Next slide. So we have a few statistics coming up about the GDSN. So obviously there's just one global registry. There's right now 114 member organizations around the world that support GDSN. Many of those are connected to specific countries such as GS1 US, there's GS1 Canada, GS1 UK, for example. There's over 56,000 GLNs active in the GDSN network. And as I mentioned before, there's 42 active data pools. And I'll make a side note and proud to say that One World Sync remains the largest data pool. We have almost 20,000 GLNs in our system, as you can see the numbers there. and that accounts for approximately 265,000 brands. So specific to healthcare, right now there's a little over 5,000 active GLNs and almost 3.5 million G10s in the network that are specific to healthcare. And more than 40% of those are One World Sync customers. So again, we're very proud of that. So the vast majority of the healthcare G10s are medical devices, as you can kind of see on the graph to the right, but pharma has begun to grow as well. In addition, I'll say this too, just as a side note. On the surface, it appears that there's only about 10% of the GLNs or G10s that are healthcare specific. But if you think about it, there are really thousands of other healthcare related products that are being sourced by healthcare companies. So just as an example, we're talking about hospitals earlier. They source products, many more products other than medical devices and pharmaceuticals. So, they might get cleaning supplies from 3M and paper products from a company like Procter & Gamble, and even electronics like computers, Dell computers or Samsung. And those products are not necessarily categorized as healthcare products, but they're all being purchased by the hospitals, and the hospitals need product data on them as well. So I make that point to say, on the surface, the statistics might not be overwhelming for adoption of GDSN within healthcare, but there's thousands of other products that are categorized, not necessarily healthcare, that are being sourced by these organizations. So GDSN and GS1 standards in the healthcare industry are growing rapidly. So that's kind of the bottom line. So, and with that, I will turn it back over to Gary.
Thank you very much, Tim. Great review of GDSN capabilities there. Our next section is on data management and communication to regulators and trading partners. This is a section that we've put together to talk about some of the challenges. Before we go into the details there, just a quick reminder, if you do have questions, go ahead and enter them in that little side chat box, and Angela's taking a look at those as they come in, and we'll have some of those for the Q&A at the end. But this next section, let's talk about some of the activities surrounding collecting, publishing, and maintaining your product data. So we had touched earlier, and just to summarize, they're in this regulatory realm. This is mandated. This is a requirement, just so that you can go ahead and continue to distribute products in these regions. And for your business side of activities, there are more customers requiring e-catalog information of your product information come to them in electronic format, specifically GDSN, as Tim had highlighted. And National Health Service of England being one of those early adopters and having a lot of documentation and activity surrounding that. There's a third category. We didn't talk at all about this group, but this is a wave that would become apparent or that would become aware of: payers, reimbursement, those involved with insurance, track and trace activities at the medical device level, a lot of safety data mining and registries and so on. All of these downstream users are very much interested in accurate, granular identification of products. So UDI is a godsend to these particular activities to be able to track and be able to do data mining and other analysis and flow products and keep track of products and so on. One of the things that we've seen is that each of these activities have different data sets. Unfortunately, there's not that uniform, nice, single implementation. Oh, that it would be. But there's tons of variations, a lot of different business rules, different submission methods, and so on, and ongoing changes as this industry starts to become mature, all of which argue for a growing need for a single, flexible master UDI data management approach, rather than trying to have a point solution and an emergency fire drill to satisfy these mandates and customer requests. This diagram illustrates your particular challenge as a manufacturer. You have a lot of source data. Usually, it's not assembled in a nice, clean UDI data set. Actually, we have yet to see one customer had everything 100% all ready to go. It's found at different locations, a lot of different sources of that information. But the task of collecting it and then transferring it to those different protocols and messaging. So in the case of the US FDA, you might have already satisfied that solution for your class 3s and 2s and have a mechanism to transfer data there. Again, that's through the FDA's electronic submission gateway, so that's a dedicated connection. European UDAMED is obviously now on the front of your mind. Again, a dedicated gateway connection. And future regulators, it looks like a lot of these will have a lot of different channel types of communications. And you may, or you're thinking about starting submitting electronic data through GDSN, as Tim had described above. So that becomes a lot of different channels, a lot of different various ways of submitting data in different protocols and different data sets. We have a couple of slides here to help you guide you along that pathway and provide some best practices. First of all, need to analyze those particular data requests. Who wants the data? Why do they want it? When do they want it? Put some strategy, scope, and planning around that. Make sure you understand the data sharing requirements. What is the data set? So we've seen actual variations down at the individual customer level where they say, yeah, I want a data set, transfer it through GDSN, but they have their particular data fields, and they're different than company B, that had similar type of requests. So understanding that data set and how it's to be delivered are crucial in planning and getting your approach in place. Now, for this discussion today, we're going to focus in on GDSN, those downstream users that need GDSN. You definitely want to find out where that data resides in your sources. Who owns it? How's it going to be updated when there's changes? If you don't have data attributes, what's the impact of not providing it? Is it an optional field, or is there problems where you have to go and do some research and find that particular data? Well, ultimately, we recommend that a process be in place, firmed up, and staff trained to be able to collect, review, and maintain that data. Working with GDSN, there's some business rules, and there's various transmission rules and so on, and formatting. Make sure you understand that. Proactively format the data, and then load it to the GDSN data pool. Next major step would be to publish that data. So there's some coordination between your downstream partner, syndicating them to your particular data set, and then actually publishing data and making sure that the data is actually sent to them. They may have a test environment, which would be extremely valuable to send some test data over and firm up the communication, and then the actual transmission of that data to the downstream recipient with their particular global location number. But unfortunately, that's not it. There's ongoing life. There's maintenance of that data. So understand some of the attributes that change. Make sure you have change control and update values as necessary, and ensure that the maintenance is understood by internal staff and they know how to do updates. And as Tim and Randy are well aware, we've seen GDSN standards change. So over the course of time, there's new values being added, new use cases. So keep track of what is going on in the standard area itself. Those are some quick takeaways, some quick best practices on your data management. I think what we'll do now is take some time and ask Randy to go over some of the One World Sync product content solutions, and then I'll follow up with some ReadTech capabilities as well. And again, a quick reminder, If you have questions, enter those in the side chat box. And Randy, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Gary. And for everybody on the phone, my name is Randy Mercer. I lead product direction and strategy here at One World Sync. So my goal today is to just, for the folks that do know us, educate you a little bit more on some of the changes recently to the organization and how we relate to ReadTech as a solution. And for the folks that don't know us, really provide you an introduction to our organization. So briefly, before I start on this slide, our platform has been around for almost 2 decades, and historically it sits between organizations that have content that represent products in some way, and organizations that need that content for some reason, whether that's an IDN, a delivery network, maybe it's an e-tailer or retailer, really could be anybody, but our platform sits between those folks, and it services the exchange and sharing of that content as a real Reader's Digest version of what we do. Some changes to our organization recently. Early in July, we were acquired from our previous ownership, which was a GS1 member organization, specifically GS1 US. We were acquired by a company called Battery Ventures, which is a company that invests heavily in technology, which was important for a few reasons. What it doesn't mean is that our new owners not being a standards body, it doesn't mean that we are now separated from the standards and that we don't fully endorse those. Just the opposite, we are still very fully entrenched in standards, and the Global Data Synchronization Network still very much serves as the underpinnings for our platform and how it works and how it services our customers. But what it does mean is that it will allow our organization to grow in ways that historically we found challenging, right? So organically and inorganically, we now have the ability to grow our organization in a lot of different directions that before we couldn't. And an example of that came on August 26th when we acquired some tools that relate to some of the subject matter that Gary was just talking about relative to the management of content, and then specifically the management of that data and content within an organization's 4 walls. In the acquisition of the Lansa syndication tool set, we call it. Moving on to September 10th, we announced sort of an extended relationship with our friends at ReadTech. We've been partners for many, many years, but we've extended that relationship very, very specifically related to UDAMED and other MDR initiatives. So an important step for us, very happy and excited to announce that relationship. And then moving on to just very recent news, we had a CEO join us that comes from many, many years of experience in the software industry. So all of that nets out to the ability for our organization to move faster in a lot of different ways, and a few things that just really evidence that we are doing just that. Gary, if you could advance the slides there. What you'll see on this slide, the obligatory logo slide, just gives some examples of some of the organizations that use our platform. We service about 13,000 organizations. That extrapolates out to about 25,000 discrete brands that leverage our platform. Some of the names you'll recognize on that slide that are very relevant to the conversation today in med device registration. Some of them are not, and that's really just indicative of the breadth of organizations that leverage our platform to exchange content, again, between folks that have it and folks that do not. Gary, if you could advance the slide again. Just want to quickly, again, describe the underpinnings and the history of our platform. So again, I know some of the folks on the phone today are our customers today and likely use our platform in the interest of Global Data Synchronization Network, or GDSN, compliance. So they're using the GDSN mechanism or choreography to move the content and information they have that represents their product to somebody that needs that. And the somebodies historically are hospitals, GPOs, or even e-tailers and retailers, depending on exactly what those products are and if they actually get sold and delivered to the consumers that way. But the value of the GDSN is it is very much this global standardized mechanism that acts as this one-to-many or many-to-many capability to deliver this product content very consistently throughout the globe. So again, that's our history. Most folks know us for that. But where we have grown as a platform in the last, we'll say 5 years, and now we're really hitting the gas on the growth in other areas of how our platform can be used. Gary, if you'll advance to the next slide, what this slide depicts is the areas of content that are more recent to how our platform is being used. If you refer to the lower left of that slide, you'll see something that we refer to as operational data. And that's that data that, again, folks have historically used our platform to communicate to the folks that need it. And it's that data that is used to operate the supply chain. I need to know how big my product is so I can, planogram it and put it on the retailer's shelf. I need to know how to cube it out in a truck. I need to know how to warehouse it. All of those things are things that would be serviced by that operational data. If you go up the 2 boxes above that, you'll see risk data, which is really what we're kind of focused on here today when you think of MDR initiatives, UDAMED specifically, that content that services how your product is represented to those agencies, those regulatory agencies, and then even the delivery networks as well. When you move up to the operational data, the opportunity data, that is the data and content that is allowing you to take advantage of other opportunities you have to represent your product. And think of e-tail, think of retail, or think of even just representing your product maybe in B2B websites between GPOs and the providers, things like that. So the net of all that is our platform goes way beyond GDSN today and the standards, and really has been extended into other areas of attribution that become very proprietary to certain industry initiative and industry needs as it relates to the marketplace. You see some examples of that over on the extreme right-hand side, and you'll see reference hospitals, regulatory websites, retail, all very different users or consumers of the content that ultimately represents your products in different ways in the marketplace. And our platform of solutions and services really supports the entire gambit of that, of not only the content, but how we have to deliver it to those endpoints. ReadTech being an example of one of those delivery mechanisms that we use as a platform. Gary, if you could advance to the next slide there. This slide sort of speaks to sort of the life cycle of a product, where it comes from. And if you look at the extreme left-hand side of that slide, and it refers to the concept of a product. So a manufacturer, whether it's a med device or otherwise, every product starts at concept stage, right? Somebody has an idea for an awesome new product that they're going to create. And ultimately, it works its way through all of these steps relative to where does information come from that represents that product to the folks that need to represent that product in the marketplace, all the way to the right-hand side where you see that product for sale, second bullet point from the right. And for sale, we mean for sale as delivered to the consumer by an IDN, by a hospital, maybe for sale by a GPO to somebody, maybe for sale on an e-commerce website or a retailer. For sale means a lot of different things, but ultimately that's the end goal, right? Somebody that makes a product, they want to sell it to a lot of people. And then at the very end of that, you see analytics. So once you are selling a product, you're always going to be interested in who's buying it and could I sell more? And if I'm not selling it enough, who could I be selling it to? So that's what we mean by analytics. Our platform lends itself to pretty much every step on that thing, except for the concept. We're not going to come up with new product ideas for somebody, but we're going to take it from there relative to how do we help organizations aggregate content, ultimately deliver it to the folks that need it, help those folks leverage that content as much as they can to sell that product or deliver it to the end consumer, and then finally analyze how's that product content working for me? Is it helping me sell more product, deliver that product more effectively? Is it aiding me in track and trace initiatives, things like that? So our platform really does apply to the entire life cycle of that product content as you see there. So specific to this phone call, what we're really focused on is UDAMED and other MDR initiatives. And so as related to that, I just want to speak briefly of how does our platform relate to ReadTech. And what this diagram sort of depicts is our platform sitting in the middle. We lovingly call our platform the Product Information Cloud. It's a cloud SaaS-based platform that you put all your content in, and we help you do that. and it's suppliers starting from the left-hand side interacting with our platform typically to introduce that content to our platform. From there, we offer a lot of service to help perfect, complete, enrich that content for whatever end use case it is destined for, whether that be the retail marketplaces or to hospitals, GPOs, or regulatory agencies. That's where ReadTech comes in for us from a regulatory agency perspective. They are hands down the world leaders, the industry experts in MDR, and so we want to leverage that as much as possible. I talked earlier about how we've had a long-standing relationship with ReadTech. So for a long time, when one of their customers had a GDSN compliance need, they leveraged us, and you'll see a two-way, bidirectional arrow between ReadTech and our box there in the middle of the screen, and that represents the way that they use our platform for GDSN compliance. We use them in just the opposite way for MDR compliance. So they are the world leader in MDR knowledge and expertise. We do not want to replace that. We couldn't, so we're going to leverage the best that exists. So from our platform, for the folks on the call that already have content on our platform, we'll allow you to leverage that content as a starting point for completing what is required for the different initiatives globally, UDAMED just being an example of that. ReadTech offers you the capability to complete that information and then ultimately deliver it to those to the med device agencies, with the value being that they're going to build out the ability to deliver that content to hopefully all of the MDRs around the world. So it gives you kind of a one-stop shop relative to how you can deliver that content. So the net of all that is you see a couple of arrows coming out of our platform. The upper one goes to GDSN recipients, and you'll see denoted there the FDA Good ID direct connection, which we have built, and we will still service that today. So servicing a couple populations of end recipients or end receivers of that content today, and then you couple that with ReadTech there on that second set of arrows, and you've now got a very complete set of delivery mechanisms out to the folks that need your content to represent your product. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of our platform and what it can do for you. And of course, if it doesn't, and you have more questions, got some opportunity here at the end of the call to issue those questions. All right, thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Randy. Really good summary of capabilities at One World Sync and relationships that we have. I'm going to take a few moments to, in similar fashion, describe some of the ReadTech capabilities and how we would use One World Sync in our data flow and our solutions to meet all the responsibilities of your downstream recipients. At a very high level, we provide those data management solutions for both medical device and pharmaceutical manufacturers to manage their data, both regulatory data and commercial data. So we position ourselves very similar to One World Sync between the manufacturer and the health authorities, and also the manufacturer and those customer trading partners. Some details on that are related to our product, the single source for medical devices. This particular platform is able to import data electronically, automatically from your internal sources. It's able to validate that information to the downstream requirements, in some cases transform, allow you to enrich that data. And then there's a workflow, so being able to monitor that, run it through workflow approval and various review steps, and then export it. As we saw earlier, there's many different channels and definitions of that channel that are receiving the data downstream. So a number of regulators, this is our forte of being able to prep data, put it into the necessary requirements and manage that data, store it, make sure it's compliant, regulatory compliant type of environment, send it off to UDAMED, send it off to the FDA, Good ID, and then as those future regulators come on board, South Korea and China and so on, having connections to them. And then this is the connection with One World Sync. So some of our clients have indicated that, well, I have data here. I also need to send data to my downstream trading partners through GDSN. And let me dive into that a little bit deeper and have an illustration, review an illustration here on single source for medical devices that includes the GDSN connection. So in this particular model, the channel would be those downstream users at GDSN. The direct connection that we have with One World Sync is valuable, and being able to connect up with them offers great capability. Being able then to redirect it through any other certified data pool to those downstream partners, and through our interface, being able to import the data from the source, make sure it's validated to GDSN standards, and being able to register that, identify and build up the structure for a hierarchy and so on, and then being able to conduct the publishing in various updates over the course of time. So we won't go into a whole lot more detail. I invite you to contact RETEC if you'd like to explore further capabilities and see how that might be a help to your particular organization. One World Sync also has some contact information here. Obviously be included with the download of the presentation. Call them, explore with them how you're able to work with both RETEC and One World Sync in putting a solution together. In some cases, there's a partnership that is the best model for your particular application, and would like to explore that further with you folks. Angela, I'm going to ask that we take a little bit of the remaining time to take a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Okay, sounds good. We had several questions that have come through. Let's take this first one. I currently use One World Sync to send data to retailers. With your two companies' partnership, will I also be able to send my data to regulatory agencies from One World Sync?
Yeah. So I'll jump in and take that one, guys. Yeah, this is Tim. I'll jump in and take that's an easy one. So I'll jump in and take it. So the short answer is yes, absolutely. You're a One World Sync customer and you need to send, for example, to UDAMED. We will certainly leverage that partnership that we were talking about earlier with RETEC. We'll ship your data basically over to RETEC, who will then submit the information to the regulator. So, and again, that just kind of reiterates why we've expanded our partnership with RETEC to do that. But if there's a more specific question around that, our contact information is there. Please reach out, and I'm happy to expand on that more.
Okay. Gary, did you want to explain a little bit? I think folks had some questions about the UDAMED delay and understanding what it meant according to Article 123D. It's about the 18-month phase and the 6 months.
Yeah, there is some timing in the legislation about a 6-month delay after the announcement that UDAMED is ready. And then following that 6-month delay after the announcement, all the requirements of UDAMED come into force and the requirements start. So that would be the start of the 18-month window for registration. And you can go back to that diagram that I had earlier and see how that would lay out. It is our assumption that if UDAMED starts in May of 2022, that according to legislation, UDAMED or European Commission would release a notice 6 months prior to that, and we'll see how that fleshes out.
Okay, great. Here's one I think for Tim or Randy. As a follow-up from Gary's presentation on UDAMED, it appears some of the data attributes are not matched to GDSN. In these circumstances, would I still be able to use the data I have with One World Sync?
Yeah, so it's Tim again. Yeah. Or go ahead, Randy.
Nope. I'll let you run with it.
Okay. Well, it's another easy one. The answer is yes. You sure will. So our system has the ability to not only handle the GDSN attributes, but we can also handle the non-GDSN attributes. That's where Randy and his team come in and build those attributes into our system so that you can easily manage your data all within that system. And Randy, if you have anything to add, feel free to jump in there.
No, you characterized it perfectly. So. Okay.
I think we've reached the hour. thank you so much for everyone's participation. Thanks to our presenters from One World Sync and ReadTech. As a follow-up, all registrants will receive via email, the email that you registered with, a link to the on-demand recording and the slides, which have a lot of great reference information. And thanks, and have a great rest of your day.